The sky over Metropolis broke without a sound. It did not tear like fabric or burn like paper. It cracked like a frozen lake under a heavy boot. For 3 seconds, the sun seemed to stop shining. The light turned cold and grey. Then the weight fell. It slammed into the city from above. It was not wind. It was not gravity. It was a pressure that crushed the will to stand. Thousands of people on the sidewalks fell to their knees at the exact same moment. They were not hurt, but they could not breathe. Their instincts told them that a predator was standing right behind them. A predator bigger than a building. Clark Kent stood up from his desk at the Daily Planet. His hands shook. He had lifted islands. He had held black holes in his palm. But this was different. This heavy feeling pushed against his soul, not his body. It felt cold and hollow. He looked out the window. The birds were not flying. They were falling straight down. The cars stopped moving because the drivers had passed out from sudden, overwhelming fear. Clark ripped his shirt open to reveal the S-shield. But for the first time in years, he felt a shiver of true doubt. This was not a monster he could punch. This was a heavy atmosphere that made him feel small. In the Hall of Justice, the alarms did not ring. They melted. The circuits designed to detect alien invasions overloaded instantly. Batman stared at the main monitor. The screen showed a massive spike of energy appearing out of nowhere. It was not radiation. It was not magic. It was not the Speed Force. It was a void, a blank spot on reality that was eating the space around it. The map of Metropolis turned red, then black. Batman pressed the emergency call button. His voice was grim. "This is not an invasion," he said. "It is an infection." A black hole ripped open in the sky above Centennial Park. It was jagged and rough, like a wound that refused to heal. Red lightning crackled around the edges, but it made no thunder. From the darkness, a shape fell. It was a boy. He wore tattered black robes that looked like shadows. He carried a sword that was too big for a human to lift. He did not fall like a rock. He fell like a feather made of lead. He drifted down, and the air screamed around him. The space between atoms seemed to stretch and groan as he passed through it. When his boots touched the green grass of the park, the color died. The green turned to grey dust in a perfect circle around him. The water in the park fountain evaporated instantly. The boy lifted his head. His orange hair was bright against the grey world he created. His eyes were brown, but they looked old and tired. He looked at the city of steel and glass. He did not recognize it. He gripped the handle of his sword. The pressure in the city doubled. Windows cracked. Car alarms blared. The Justice League arrived in a blur of motion surrounding the park. Superman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Flash hovered in the air, ready to fight. The boy did not look afraid. He looked annoyed. He looked at Superman floating in the air and frowned. The air around the boy twisted. A mask made of white bone began to form over his face. A hollow sound echoed through the entire city. It sounded like a heavy door slamming shut. In an empty room, the universe had just changed rules, and no one knew the new game yet. The silence in Centennial Park was heavier than the noise of the city had ever been. It was a silence that pressed against the eardrums, a physical weight that tasted like rusty iron and old rain. Superman hovered 10 feet off the ground, his red cape hanging perfectly still despite the wind that usually whipped through the skyscrapers of Metropolis. He looked down at the boy with the orange hair and the massive black sword, and for the first time in a very long time, the Man of Steel felt a sensation he could not name. It was not fear exactly, but a profound biological rejection. Every cell in his Kryptonian body was screaming that the entity standing on the dead grey grass did not belong in this universe. The boy was not just a foreign object, he was a glitch in the code of reality. To Clark's X-ray vision, the boy was a blur of static. There was no bone structure, no beating heart, no flowing blood. There was only a dense, roaring core of white-hot energy that looked less like a power source and more like a captured star, wrapped in the shape of a human. Wonder Woman floated to Superman's right, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Her divine eyes, trained by centuries of combat and myth, saw something Superman could not. She saw the outline of a skull superimposed over the boy's face. She saw the tattered black robes not as fabric, but as woven shadows. She smelled the grave. This was not a villain or a monster from the Phantom Zone. This was a psychopomp, a conductor of souls, but one who had lost his way and brought the weight of the underworld with him. She tightened her grip. If this boy was death, then he was a death that had gone rogue. To the left, Green Lantern Hal Jordan created a barrier around the perimeter of the park, a glowing green wall designed to contain nuclear blasts, but the wall was flickering. The green light sizzled and popped as if it were being eaten by invisible termites. Hal frowned, concentrating harder, his ring communicating a warning he had never heard before. The ring did not say, "Threat detected." It said, "Reality violation in progress." Ichigo Kurosaki tightened his grip on Zangetsu. His head was pounding with a migraine that felt like a drill boring into his temples. The spiritual pressure of this place was all wrong. The Reishi, the spirit particles that made up the atmosphere into the Soul Society, and Hueco was thin here, almost non-existent. Instead, the air was thick with matter, dense and suffocating. He felt like he was drowning in concrete. He looked at the floating figures surrounding him. They were bright, too bright. They wore costumes that screamed for attention, shining in primary colors that hurt his eyes. He tried to sense their Reiatsu. The man in the blue suit and red cape had a presence that was blinding, like a sun, but it had no spiritual edge. It was just raw, physical power. The woman felt like magic, sharp and ancient. The man in green felt like a construct of pure will. None of them felt like hollows. None of them felt like Quincy's. But they were looking at him with the same look everyone gave him before a fight started. Superman spoke first. His voice was calm, projected with a precision that allowed it to be heard over the sirens wailing in the distance. But he did not step closer. He held his hand out, palm open, the universal gesture of peace. He asked the boy to identify himself and to lower the weapon. He explained that the boy's presence was causing distress to the citizens of Metropolis, and that they needed to contain the energy radiating from him. It was a standard speech, one that had de-escalated invasions and calmed rampaging beasts. But Ichigo barely heard the words. The language was English, which he understood, but the tone was wrong. It sounded like a teacher scolding a student, or a warden addressing a prisoner. Ichigo did not lower the sword. He shifted his stance, his muscles coiling. He asked where he was. He asked where Yuach had gone. He asked why the sky felt so heavy. Superman did not know the names the boy spoke. He glanced at Wonder Woman, then back to the boy. He repeated the command to drop the weapon, his voice dropping an octave, becoming firmer. The air around Superman began to shimmer with heat vision, a subtle warning. Ichigo saw the eyes glow red. He had seen eyes glow red before. Blasts, hollow masks. He reacted on instinct. He did not drop the sword. He swung it. It was not an attack meant to kill. It was a getaway swing, a release of pressure to create distance. But the physics of the DC universe were not prepared for the density of Ichigo's spiritual pressure. When Zangetsu moved, it did not just cut the air, it dragged the fabric of space along with it. A wave of black and red energy erupted from the blade. A Getsuga Tensho that was small by Ichigo standards, but catastrophic for Metropolis. The wave did not travel like a beam of light. It traveled like a tsunami of gravity. Superman took the hit on his chest. He expected the impact of a missile or a laser. What he felt was the sensation of his soul being shredded. The blast did not burn his skin. It bypassed his invulnerable bioelectric aura entirely and struck the very essence of his being. Superman gasped, his eyes going wide, and he was hurled backward, smashing through the green energy barrier as if it were glass. He flew across the city, crashing through 3 office buildings before skidding to a halt in the middle of a busy intersection a mile away. He lay there for a second, stunned, clutching his chest. There was no blood, but he felt cold. A deep, freezing cold that radiated from the inside out. He tried to stand and found his legs trembling. It was the weakness of kryptonite, but without the nausea. It was the weakness of mortality. Back in the park, the chaos erupted instantly. Wonder Woman moved with the speed of Hermes, her sword drawn. She did not hold back. She lunged at Ichigo, her blade aiming for his shoulder to disarm him. Ichigo parried. The sound of metal striking metal usually rang like a bell. This time it sounded like a scream. The collision of the magical Amazonian steel and the Zanpakuto created a shock wave that shattered every window within a 6-block radius. Cars were flipped over, trees were uprooted. The ground beneath them pulverized into fine sand. Diana was strong, incredibly strong. But when her sword connected with Zangetsu, she felt a weight that threatened to buckle her knees. It was the weight of thousands of dead souls. She gritted her teeth and pushed back, her bracelets glowing. Flash was next. He was a blur of red lightning, moving faster than thought. He intended to run in, snatch the sword from the boy's hands, and run out before the boy's synapses could fire. He entered the zone of influence around Ichigo, the heavy spiritual pressure that crushed the grass. Suddenly, the Speed Force rebelled. The air around Ichigo was so dense with Reiatsu that it had acted like a non-Newtonian fluid. The faster Flash tried to move through it, the harder it became. He felt like he was running through drying cement. He slowed down, visible for a fraction of a second, just inches from the sword. Ichigo's eyes tracked him. To Ichigo, who regularly fought at faster-than-light speeds in high-density spirit worlds, Flash was fast, but he was not invisible. Ichigo twisted his wrist, the flat of the giant blade slamming into Flash's chest. The speedster was launched backward, skipping across the pavement like a stone on water. He crashed into a statue of Lex Luthor, shattering it. Flash groaned, rolling onto his back. He felt sick. It wasn't the impact. It was the contact. Where the sword had touched him, he felt numb. The numbness was spreading, a spiritual paralysis that made his connection to the Speed Force flicker and sputter. Hal Jordan realized that containment was failing. He saw Superman down, Diana locked in a struggle, and Flash incapacitated. He escalated. He rose high into the air and aimed his ring. He visualized a hydraulic press the size of a mountain. Green energy manifested, a colossal weight slamming down on Ichigo. Ichigo looked up. He felt the pressure of the construct. It was just energy. It was just reishi, shaped by will. He had broken out of stronger cages. He flared his Reiatsu. The black robes billowed as a column of gold and black energy erupted from his body. It pierced the green construct, shattering it into jagged shards of light that rained down onto the city. Ichigo jumped. He did not fly like a Kryptonian. He jumped using the air itself as a foothold. the sound of the air cracking echoing like a thunderclap. He was in the sky instantly, face to face with Green Lantern. Hal's ring shield flared automatically, but Ichigo was already moving past him. Ichigo didn't want to fight these people. He wanted high ground. He wanted to see where the boundaries of this world ended. He used Shumpo, vanishing from visual sight and reappearing atop the daily planet globe. He stood there, looking out at the horizon. It went on forever. There was no Seiraita wall. There was no white desert of Huecomundo. There were just more cities, more oceans, more chaos. Batman watched from the sophisticated sensor suite of the Batwing, hovering in stealth mode 2,000 feet above the chaos. The data streaming across his screens was impossible. The boy had no heat signature, no heartbeat. He did not displace air when he moved. He displaced reality. The energy readings were spiking off the charts, but they weren't radiation. They were akin to the energy spikes recorded during near-death experiences, but amplified by a factor of 1 billion. It's necrotic, Batman muttered to himself, recording everything. He's bleeding death radiation. Batman saw the destruction below. The park was gone. The surrounding streets were cracked. Superman was getting back up, looking pale. Diana was shaking her arms out, looking winded. Batman activated the Batwing's PA system, linking it to the Justice League comms. Do not engage in close quarters. His voice rasped in their ears. Target drains bioenergy on contact. Ranged attacks only. Containment is priority, not submission. But the situation was already spiraling. The military had arrived. Apache helicopters crested the skyline, their weapons locked on the figure standing on the daily planet globe. They didn't wait for the Justice League's permission. They saw a monster that had just swatted Superman. They opened fire. Hellfire missiles streaked toward the daily planet. Ichigo watched them come. He didn't understand the technology, but he understood the intent. He didn't dodge. He simply raised his hand. He caught the first missile. It exploded in his palm. The explosion was massive, engulfing the top of the building in fire and smoke. The citizens of Metropolis screamed. But as the smoke cleared, Ichigo was still standing there. His hand was blackened, his sleeve torn, but he was unharmed. The hierro, the defensive steel skin he had inherited from his hollow powers, was harder than titanium. But the annoyance was rising. The hollow mask fragments on his face began to grow, covering more of his jaw. The inner hollow was waking up, agitated by the confusing, hostile atmosphere. Ichigo looked down at the helicopters. He swung his sword in a horizontal arc. He didn't release energy this time. He just created wind pressure. The sheer force of the swing created a vacuum blade that sliced the rotors off the lead helicopter cleanly. The machine began to spin and fall. Superman, recovering his speed, swooped in and caught the helicopter before it hit the street, setting it down gently. He looked up at Ichigo with eyes that were no longer just concerned, but angry. Superman shot up like a bullet, breaking the sound barrier. He slammed into Ichigo mid-air, tackling him off the building. The two of them crashed into the stratosphere, grappling. Superman's strength was infinite, but Ichigo's spiritual density made him heavy, immovably heavy. They traded blows that cleared the clouds for miles. Superman punched Ichigo in the jaw, a blow that would have shattered a moon. Ichigo spat blood, his head snapping back, but he didn't lose consciousness. His blood vein armor, flared blue beneath his skin, absorbing the kinetic impact. Ichigo headbutted Superman. The bone mask on Ichigo's face cracked against Superman's forehead. Superman reeled, his vision swimming. It was like being hit by a planet. "Stop!" Superman shouted. his voice ringing in the thin air. "We don't have to do this." "Then stop attacking me," Ichigo roared back. His voice was distorted, double-layered, the hollow voice underneath the human one. "Tell me where I am. Tell me why the Reishi is dead." "I don't know what Reishi is," Superman yelled. "You are in Metropolis. You are on Earth." "Earth?" Ichigo paused, floating in the upper atmosphere. He looked down at the blue marble. It looked like the world of the living, but it wasn't his world of the living. The continents were slightly different. The cities were too big. The energy was wrong. "This isn't my Earth," he whispered. The realization hit him harder than the punch. He was not just lost in a dimension. He was lost in a different reality entirely. The despair opened a door in his soul he had been trying to keep shut. The hollow sensed the weakness. The mask fully formed over Ichigo's face. 2 horns sprouted. His hair grew long and wild. The markings on his chest turned blood red. The transformation was explosive. A column of red energy blasted Superman away, sending him tumbling back down toward the city. The Vasto Lord, or something near it, screamed. It was a sound that shattered glass across the entire eastern seaboard. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated predation. Below, in the streets of Metropolis, the infection Batman had predicted began to manifest. People who had been near the park began to collapse. They weren't dying, but their souls were being weighed down by the residual Reiatsu Ichigo was leaking. They felt a crushing sorrow, a despair so deep they couldn't move. Some began to hallucinate, seeing chains attached to their chests. Others saw shadowy monsters watching them from alleyways. The police lines broke as officers fell to their knees, weeping uncontrollably. Cyborg, monitoring from the Watchtower, saw the global energy map light up. "It's spreading," he transmitted to the team. "The energy isn't dissipating. It's sticking to the matter. It's rewriting the atomic structure of the air in Metropolis. If he keeps releasing this much power, the atmosphere will become toxic to normal humans within the hour. Not toxic chemically, spiritually. They'll just give up on living." Batman, piloting the Batwing, adjusted his strategy. "Clark, Diana, get back. We can't fight him physically. We're just agitating the reactor. We need to ground him. We need magic." "I am here," a voice echoed. Dr. Fate stepped out of a portal of gold anks in the middle of the street. The Lord of Order looked up at the red star burning in the sky that was Ichigo. "This is not a creature of chaos," Fate intoned, his voice vibrating with cosmic authority. "This is a creature of balance, but a balance from a geometry that does not exist here. He is forcing our reality to accept a new law of physics. We must banish him or bind him." Fate raised both hands. The helmet of Nabu glowed blindingly bright. He began to weave a spell of dimensional sealing. In the sky, the hollow Ichigo felt the magic. It felt like Kido, but ancient and rigid. He didn't like it. He pointed his sword down. He charged a Zero. It wasn't the blue Zero of a normal Arrancar. It was the Granray Zero, mixed with his Getsuga. It was purple and black, crackling with red lightning. "Fate's shield," Superman screamed, diving back down to cover the civilians. Ichigo fired. The beam was a lance of annihilation. It struck Dr. Fate's golden shield. The impact turned the night sky into noon. The shield held for a microsecond, then shattered. The beam plowed into the street, vaporizing pavement, sewer lines, and subway tunnels instantly. It carved a trench 3 miles long through the heart of Metropolis. The ocean rushed into the wound. The steam explosion alone leveled 2 city blocks. Ichigo hovered in the smoke, panting. The mask cracked. 1 horn fell off. The human Ichigo fought for control, shoving the hollow back down. He looked at the destruction he had caused. The trench filled with seawater, the burning buildings, the tiny figures of the heroes pulling people from the rubble. "No," Ichigo wheezed. His voice was his own again. I didn't mean." He clutched his head. The pressure was too much. He needed to hide. He needed to suppress his Reiatsu before he killed everyone just by existing. He used Shunpo, forcing his body to move despite the exhaustion. He vanished from the sky. The Justice League did not pursue. They couldn't. They were too busy saving the city from the aftermath. Superman lifted a collapsing skyscraper, his face grim. Wonder Woman used her lasso to pull a bus out of the sinkhole. Flash ran triage, moving thousands of injured people to hospitals in Gotham and Star City. In the shadows of a destroyed subway tunnel deep beneath the bedrock, Ichigo collapsed. He stabbed his sword into the concrete to stay upright. He pulled the remnants of the bone mask off his face, tearing skin with it. He bled, panting in the dark. He suppressed his power, pulling it all inward until he felt small, until he felt like nothing. He sat in the darkness, listening to the sirens above, listening to the screams he had caused. He was a protector. That was his whole existence. And in the first 10 minutes of being here, he had become a catastrophe. He curled his knees to his chest. He needed to understand the rules of this place. He needed to find out why his sword felt so heavy, and he needed to survive the gods who would undoubtedly come for him. Above him, the city of Metropolis burned, and the metaphysical infection of Reiatsu began to seep into the soil, planting seeds of something that should never grow in the DC universe. The world had not ended, but it had been permanently bruised, and the bruise was turning black. The dust in Metropolis did not settle. It hung in the air, magnetized by a force that defied gravity and wind. It was a fine grey powder that tasted of ozone and old blood. In the emergency triage centers set up around the perimeter of the blast zone, the chaos was silent. The injured were not screaming. They were staring at the ceiling, their eyes wide and unblinking, gripped by a paralysis that the paramedics could not diagnose. Dr. Midnight, brought in by the Justice League for his expertise in medical anomalies, stood over a patient in a mobile medical tent. The patient was a young man, a construction worker caught near the edge of the trench. He had no broken bones, he had no internal bleeding, but his heart rate was slowing down to a rhythm that suggested hibernation. Dr. Midnight looked at the monitors. The brain activity was spiking, not with seizure patterns, but with the firing patterns associated with intense REM sleep and night terrors. The man was living a nightmare, but he was awake. Midnight adjusted his goggles, switching to a spectrum that could detect bioelectric souls. What he saw made him recoil. A heavy iron-grey chain protruded from the center of the man's chest. It was not physical matter. His hand passed through it, but visually, to his enhanced sight, it was as real as the gurney. The chain was short, the links corroding before his eyes. It was eating into the man's chest cavity. Midnight stepped back, his breath catching in his throat. He looked around the tent. Every single patient from the blast zone had a chain. Some were long, trailing off the side of the beds. Others were short, dangerously close to the heart. This was not a weapon. This was a spiritual sentence. In the Batcave, the mood was funereal. Bruce Wayne sat in the dark, the light of the massive computer screen illuminating his cowl. He was not looking at tactical data. He was looking at the footage of the fight slowed down to 1,000th of a second. He watched the boy, Ichigo Kurosaki, swing the sword. He watched the air distort. He watched Superman fall. But what held his attention was the energy reading. Batman, had cross-referenced the energy signature with every database in the known universe. It did not match Kryptonian solar reserves. It did not match the Green Lantern power battery. It did not match the magical signature of Atlantis or Themyscira. It matched, terrifyingly, the theoretical readings of the source wall itself, but inverted. It was entropy given form. Alfred stood behind the chair, a tray of coffee untouched in his hands. He watched the screen as Batman brought up a simulation of Metropolis. A red stain was spreading through the subterranean layers of the city. It was the boy's energy, sinking into the earth like heavy water. It was contaminating the bedrock. Batman spoke without turning around. He said that they were looking at this wrong. He said they were treating it like an invasion, but it was a contamination event. He compared it to bringing a radiatio source into a nursery. The boy likely didn't mean to hurt anyone, but his biology was incompatible with their physics. Every breath the boy took was poisoning the local reality. If they didn't isolate him, the laws of thermodynamics in Metropolis would break down within 48 hours. Deep beneath the city, in the labyrinth of abandoned subway maintenance tunnels that dated back to the turn of the century, Ichigo Kurosaki sat against a damp brick wall. It was dark, pitch black to human eyes, but to him, it was grey. He could see the spirits of the rats scurrying in the pipes. He could see the lingering emotional residue of the homeless people who usually slept here. He held Zangetsu across his lap. The sword remained in its Shikai form, the massive butcher knife shape, because Ichigo did not have the strength to seal it, or perhaps because the density of this world forced the sword to stay open to process the pressure. Ichigo was bleeding from the nose. His body was fighting a war on two fronts. On the outside, the atmosphere of this earth was choking him. It lacked reishi. He was like a fish on land gasping for spiritual oxygen. To survive, his body was cannibalizing its own reserves, burning his own soul to keep his heart beating. On the inside, the Hollow was screaming. The conflict with Superman had woken the beast, and now it scratched at the back of Ichigo's mind, demanding to be let out so it could feed. It sensed the power of the beings above, the sun god, the Amazon, the speedster. It wanted to eat them. Ichigo clamped his hands over his ears, trying to drown out the laughter echoing in his inner world. He needed to rest. He needed to figure out how to open a garganta, a portal back to the precipice world. But he couldn't focus his Reiatsu. Every time he tried to gather energy, the air around him grew heavy and crushed the concrete floor. A sound interrupted his internal struggle. It was the scuff of a boot on gravel. Ichigo looked up, his eyes narrowing. He didn't sense a hero. He didn't sense a soldier. He sensed a small, flickering flame of life. A girl, no older than 12, stood at the junction of the tunnel. She wore a dirty coat and held a flashlight that was flickering. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the air around him. The spiritual pressure he was leaking was so dense, it was becoming visible to normal humans as a heat haze. The girl stepped closer. She shouldn't have been there. The police had evacuated the subways. But in every city, there are those who fall through the cracks, the people who live in the dark because the light has burned them. Ichigo tried to wave her away. He croaked out a warning. He told her to run. He told her it wasn't safe. The girl didn't move. She stared at his chest. She pointed a trembling finger. She asked him why he had a chain. Ichigo looked down. He didn't have a chain. But then he looked at her. He saw it. A chain, sprouting from her chest, the links rusted and heavy. It was the chain of fate. In his world, living humans had these chains connecting their souls to their bodies. If the chain broke, they died. If the chain corroded, They became hollows. But here, in this universe, the rules were loose. His presence was forcing the spiritual logic of the soul society onto this girl. His Reiatsu was accelerating her despair. The chain on her chest was eroding visibly, rust flaking off like snow. Ichigo scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his ribs. He realized with horror what was happening. He was a reactor leaking radiation, and she was getting radiation sickness. Only instead of cancer, she was getting hollowfication. He backed away, stumbling over debris. He shouted at her to get back. The girl fell to her knees, clutching her chest. She began to scream. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of emptiness. The flashlight rolled away, the beam spinning across the wet walls. Her shadow stretched and warped. It detached from her feet and rose up behind her, a looming, bulbous shape with white teeth. Above ground, Lex Luthor watched the seismic monitors in his private bunker beneath the LexCorp tower. He was not interested in saving lives. He was interested in the anomaly. He had deployed a squadron of automated drones into the subway tunnels, small, silent machines equipped with nth metal sensors he had purchased on the black market. He watched the feed on his wall of screens. He saw the heat signature of the boy. He saw the girl. And he saw the transformation begin. Luthor leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with cold scientific curiosity. He tapped a command into his console. He did not send help. He sent a containment unit. He wanted to see what would happen. He wanted to see if the boy could kill the monster, or if the monster would kill the boy. Either result provided data on how to kill Superman. In the tunnel, the girl's scream cut off abruptly. A white substance exploded from her face, hardening instantly into a mask. It was a simple mask, bird-like, with a long beak. Her body twisted, bones cracking and reforming. She grew larger, her dirty coat shredding as grey fur burst from her skin. A hole opened in the center of her chest, right where her heart had been. The chain of fate vanished, replaced by the void. She was no longer a girl. She was a hollow, a low-level one, a standard infantry of the Hueco Mundo armies. But in the confined space of the DC subway, she was a nightmare. The hollow shrieked, a sound that shattered the flashlight lens. It lunged at Ichigo. Ichigo stood frozen. He had killed thousands of hollows. He had purified them, sending their souls to the Soul Society, but he had never seen a human turn in front of him. He had never been the cause. The hollow's claw raked across his chest. His blood vein protected him from being disemboweled, but the force knocked him back into the wall. The impact shook the street above. Ichigo grabbed the hollow's wrist. He looked into the empty eye sockets of the mask. He could feel the girl's soul inside, trapped, screaming in confusion. He knew what he had to do. He had to purify her. He had to cut her. But his hand wouldn't move. If he cut her with Zangetsu, where would she go? There was no soul society here. There was no hell gate. If he killed her here, would her soul simply cease to exist? The hesitation cost him. The hollow bit him on the shoulder, its teeth grinding against his iron-hard skin. The pain was sharp and grounding. Ichigo roared, shoving the beast away. He raised Zangetsu. He had no choice. He swung the blade, the flat side slamming into the hollow's mask. He wasn't trying to cut. He was trying to knock her out. But hollows don't get knocked out. The beast recovered instantly, spitting acid that sizzled on the concrete. The acid ate through a support pillar. The ceiling groaned. Suddenly, the wall of the tunnel exploded inward. Luthor's containment unit arrived. It was a bulky, spider-like tank, heavily armored. It didn't care about the girl. It fired a net of electrified cables at Ichigo. The voltage was calibrated to stun a Kryptonian. When the cables hit Ichigo, They didn't stun him. They acted as a conduit. Ichigo's Reiatsu, agitated and overflowing, surged back up the cables. The tank's battery overloaded instantly. The machine exploded, sending shrapnel tearing through the tunnel. The explosion collapsed the ceiling. Debris rained down, burying the hollow and separating Ichigo from it. Sunlight streamed in from the hole above. Ichigo stood in the shaft of light, coughing in the dust. He looked up. Floating above the hole, framed by the smoke, was Wonder Woman. She looked down, her face a mask of warrior stoicism. She saw the boy. She saw the wreckage. And then she saw the hollow clawing its way out of the rubble. Diana did not know what a hollow was. She saw a monster. She saw a beast that smelled of rot and evil. She acted on instinct. She drew her sword and dove. She was faster than Ichigo could track in his exhausted state. She struck the hollow. Her sword, forged by Hephaestus, could slice atoms. It sliced through the hollow's mask and neck in one fluid motion. "No!" Ichigo screamed, reaching out. The hollow dissolved. It didn't bleed. It turned into black dust and faded away. There was no purification. There was no hell butterfly to guide the soul. The girl was just gone. The spiritual pressure that had been the girl simply evaporated into the void. Ichigo felt it. He felt her soul shatter. In this universe, without the cycle of reincarnation maintained by the Shinigami, the death of a hollow was absolute oblivion. Wonder Woman landed, sheathing her sword. She turned to Ichigo. She expected him to surrender. She expected him to be grateful that she had dispatched the monster. Instead, she saw a look of pure horror on his face. Ichigo fell to his knees. He looked at the spot where the girl had been. He looked at his hands. The guilt crashed into him like a physical blow. He had done this. He had brought this infection here. And now, because the rules were different, he couldn't even save them. "You killed her," Ichigo whispered. Wonder Woman frowned. "It was a monster. It was attacking you." "She was a child," Ichigo yelled, looking up at her, tears of frustration mixing with the blood on his face. "She was a human. I turned her. I was supposed to fix it." Diana stepped back, confused. "Turned her? What are you talking about?" Before Ichigo could answer, the ground shook again. The death of the hollow had released a burst of negative spiritual energy. In the Bleach universe, this energy would be recycled. Here, it had nowhere to go. It soaked into the ground, and the ground reacted. The shadows in the subway tunnel began to lengthen. They pulled themselves off the walls. They formed shapes, not just one hollow, 10, 20. The residual energy from the girl's death combined with Ichigo's leaking Reiatsu was jump-starting a chain reaction. The rats, the insects, the bacteria in the sewers, everything with a spark of life was mutating. Small, lizard-like hollows began to crawl out of the darkness. They chattered and hissed, then larger ones, human-sized shadows with white masks. They were forming from the very atmosphere of Metropolis. The city was having an allergic reaction to Ichigo, and the symptom was demons. Wonder Woman drew her sword again. "By the gods," she whispered. She tapped her comms. "Cal, Bruce, we have a situation. The hostility is not contained. It is multiplying." Ichigo stood up. He grabbed Zangetsu. He wiped the blood from his eyes. He stopped suppressing his power. Suppressing it was what caused the pressure to build up and leak out slowly, poisoning the girl. He realized he couldn't hide. If he hid, people rotted. If he wanted to stop this, he had to burn it away. He had to be the Soul Reaper. "Don't touch them," Ichigo said to Wonder Woman. His voice was cold, dead serious. "Your weapons, they destroy the soul. You can't kill them. If you kill them, they're gone forever." They are monsters, Diana argued, parrying a lunge from a lizard hollow. They must be stopped. I am the only one who can stop them, Ichigo said. He raised his sword. Getsuga. The blue light gathered on the blade. It was wild, jagged. Tensho. He swung. The blast was controlled this time. He didn't aim for the city. He aimed for the swarm. The wave of spirit energy washed over the forming hollows. It didn't incinerate them. It purified them. The masks shattered. The dark energy dissipated. The small spirits of the animals were released, fading gently into the ether. It was a mass exorcism, but the effort dropped Ichigo to one knee. He used the sword to prop himself up. The output required to purify this world's dense matter was 10 times what it cost at home. He was burning out. Superman descended through the hole in the street, his cape settling around him. He saw the dissipating shadows. He saw Ichigo on his knees. He saw Diana unharmed but shaken. Superman floated down, his feet touching the rubble. He looked at Ichigo. He saw the boy was exhausted, hurt and terrified. The anger from the earlier fight was gone, replaced by the heavy burden of responsibility. "We can help you," Superman said softly. "But you have to stop fighting. You have to come with us. We have a containment field that can hold your energy. You won't hurt anyone else." Ichigo looked at the man of steel. He wanted to believe him, but he felt the other presence approaching. It wasn't a hero. It wasn't a hollow. It was cold, calculating, and human. Lex Luthor, in his green and purple power armor, descended into the tunnel from the other side of the collapse. He hovered, his repulsor beams charging. "The alien is property of LexCorp," Luthor announced, his voice amplified. "He attacked my city. He killed my citizens. I am taking him into custody." "Stand down, Lex," Superman warned, stepping between Luthor and Ichigo. "You don't understand what he is, Superman." Luthor sneered. "He isn't a traveler. He's a disease. Look at the readings. He's turning reality into a grave. If you put him in a cell, he'll just rot the prison. I have the technology to siphon his energy, to cure him." Ichigo looked between them. The god who wanted to cage him, and the man who wanted to dissect him. He looked at the spot where the girl died. He realized there was no safe harbor here. If he went with Superman, his power would eventually break the containment and kill the people guarding him. If he went with Luthor, he would be a lab rat. "I'm not going with any of you," Ichigo said. He stood up. The air began to vibrate. The Bankai command sat on the tip of his tongue. He knew it was a bad idea. Bankai condensed his power, made it sharper, heavier. In this world, Tensor Zangetsu might cut a hole in the universe that couldn't be patched. But he needed speed. He needed to get away from the civilians. He needed to get to the one place where his power wouldn't hurt living humans. He looked at the ground. He looked deeper. He sensed a place where the spirits were thick, where the energy was dark and chaotic. A place that felt like home, but wrong. "Bankai," Ichigo whispered. The explosion of spiritual pressure was vertical. It shot up into the sky like a black pillar, blowing the clouds away for miles. The sheer density of the release forced Superman, Wonder Woman, and Luthor to brace themselves against the wind. When the dust cleared, Ichigo's appearance had changed. He wore the long black coat. He held the slender black katana. The chain on the hilt clinked softly. He moved. It was not speed. It was teleportation. He appeared behind Superman, not to attack, but to launch off him. He kicked off Superman's shoulder, generating a sonic boom that shattered the remaining windows on the street. Ichigo shot into the sky, but then he turned and dove. He dove straight down, past the subway, past the sewers, past the bedrock. He phased through the ground using his spirit form, descending into the deep crust of the earth. He was heading for the nearest magical ley line. He was heading for the vibration that felt like death. He was heading for the phantom zone projector stored into their fortress of solitude. No, he was heading for something older. He was drawn to the source of magic in this world, hoping to find a door. But in doing so, he left a trail. The tunnel he carved through the earth with his Reiatsu did not close. It remained as a scar in the geography of Metropolis. And from that scar, the infection began to pulse. The soil turned grey. The trees in the park above withered and died instantly. The catastrophe was no longer a moment. It was a location. Metropolis now had a wound that bled depression. Superman watched him go, his X-ray vision tracking the descent deep into the mantle. "He's running," Superman said. "He is frightened," Wonder Woman added. "But he is right. We cannot kill the shadows he creates. Only he can. Then we have a problem." Batman's voice crackled over the comms. "Because he just entered the strata, where we buried the casket of Doomsday." The silence on the comms was absolute. "He's going to wake it up," Superman said, his face draining of color. "Worse," Batman corrected. "His energy is reanimating dead tissue. If he gets close to Doomsday, he won't just wake him up. He might hollowfy him." The second catastrophe had begun before the dust of the first had settled. Ichigo was seeking isolation, but he was blindly walking into the cage of the ultimate monster. And the universe held its breath, waiting to see what would happen when the unkillable beast met the boy who carried death in his pocket. The civilians of Metropolis, those who hadn't fled, locked their doors and wept without knowing why. The age of heroes was paused. The age of ghosts had begun. The darkness deep within the crust of the earth was absolute. It was a place where light had never existed. A crushing depth of superheated rock and shifting tectonic plates. The pressure here was enough to turn carbon into diamond, a weight that would flatten a tank into a sheet of foil. For Ichigo Kurosaki, moving through the magma and bedrock in his spirit form, the physical pressure was negligible, but the spiritual isolation was deafening. He was miles beneath the surface, far away from the fragile souls of the humans he had hurt, far away from the sun god Superman and the warrior woman. He sought silence. He sought a place where his Reiatsu could leak out without poisoning a city. But even here, in the geological heart of the planet, he could feel the wrongness of this universe. The earth itself felt hostile. The vibrations of the planet were dissonant, lacking the hum of the spirit particles he was used to. He was walking through a dead world, a world of pure matter that rejected his spiritual existence. Ichigo stopped. He floated in a pocket of magma, the orange glow illuminating his bankai coat, which rippled as if caught in a wind that did not exist. He clutched Tensa Zangetsu. The blade was vibrating. It wasn't the hum of battle anticipation. It was a warning. His instincts, sharpened by years of fighting beings that defied logic, told him he was not alone. But there was no life here. There were no heartbeats. There was only a cold, dense void ahead of him. It felt like the precipice world, but heavier. It felt like a grave. He drifted forward, phasing through a layer of lead-lined granite. He emerged into a cavern that should not have been there. It was a smooth, artificial bubble in the rock, lined with a metal he didn't recognize. It was nth metal, though Ichigo didn't know the name. It was a tomb built by the Justice League to hold something that could not be killed, only buried. In the center of the cavern stood a massive sarcophagus. It was covered in warning sigils, Kryptonian glyphs, and magical wards. To Ichigo, the wards looked like crude Kido, clumsy and fragile. He stepped closer. The air in the cavern was stale, recycled for decades. He could feel a presence inside the box. It wasn't a soul. It was a knot of rage. It was a biological singularity of hate that had been forced into a coma. Ichigo intended to turn back. He wanted no part of this. But his Reiatsu, the very thing he came here to hide, betrayed him. The high-density spiritual pressure radiating from his Bankai form acted like a corrosive acid on the physical containment field. The nth metal began to rust. The magical wards flickered and died, short-circuited by the overwhelming presence of a death god. On the Watchtower, the sensors screamed. Batman, who had barely slept in 48 hours, watched the telemetry from the deep earth sensors. The vault was compromised. He slammed his fist onto the console. He had calculated the trajectory. He knew the boy was heading down. But the probability of him stumbling upon the exact coordinates of the deep side was astronomical. It wasn't bad luck. It was gravity. The monster in the box was a chaotic attractor, and the boy was a chaotic variable. They were drawn to each other. Batman opened a channel to the entire League, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute silence. He declared a code Omega. He told them that the burial site was breached. He told them to prepare for the resurrection. Back in the cavern, the sarcophagus cracked. It didn't explode. It cracked with the sound of a mountain breaking. A fissure ran down the center of the metal lid. Ichigo stepped back, raising his sword. He felt the energy leaking from the crack. It was red, spiky, and familiar. It felt like a Menos Grande, but stripped of all intelligence, leaving only hunger. A grey hand punched through the metal. It was covered in bony protrusions. Ichigo watched, horrified, as the hand grasped the edge of the hole. The metal groaned and tore like wet cardboard. The creature pulled itself out. Doomsday stood up. He was a towering monstrosity of grey skin and white bone spurs. His eyes were covered by a bone ridge, but he turned his head unerringly toward Ichigo. In any other timeline, Doomsday would have roared and attacked. But this was not a normal awakening. Doomsday was a biological machine, designed to adapt to any threat. He had been killed by blunt force, by heat, by energy. He had evolved defenses against them. But he had never encountered a Shinigami. He had never encountered a being made of spiritual matter. As Doomsday looked at Ichigo, the heavy atmosphere of Reiatsu washed over him. The infection happened instantly. Doomsday's cells, programmed to adapt, tried to metabolize the spiritual pressure. They failed. The pressure was not biological. It was metaphysical. It attacked the concept of Doomsday's life. A chain erupted from the center of Doomsday's chest. It was a thick, rusted chain, rattling in the silence of the cavern. Doomsday looked down. He did not understand fear, but he understood intrusion. He grabbed the chain with his massive hand and pulled. He ripped the chain out of his own chest. A normal soul would have been destroyed. A normal human would have died. Doomsday did not die. The tearing of the chain created a vacuum. A hole opened in his chest, a perfect circle of void. The white bone spurs on his body began to shift. They grew longer, curving around his face. The bone ridge over his eyes cracked and reshaped into a mask. A vertical line appeared, then teeth. Doomsday was not just resurrecting. He was undergoing hollowfication. The ultimate biological weapon was becoming a vasto lord. Ichigo felt the shift in reality. The creature's roar was no longer just a sound. It was a spiritual shockwave. Getsuga, Ichigo started, knowing he had to put this thing down before it left the room. He swung Tensei Zangetsu. The black Getsuga Tensho, a condensed beam of destruction, fired at point-blank range. It hit Doomsday in the chest, right in the new hollow hole. The blast should have vaporized him. Instead, the hole in Doomsday's chest swirled. The energy was sucked in. Doomsday absorbed the Getsuga. His grey skin turned a dark, bruised purple. Red lines traced their way across his muscles. He had adapted. He had learned to eat spirit energy. Doomsday opened his mouth, and a ball of red and black energy formed. It was a Cero, but powered by the engine of a Kryptonian killer. Ichigo barely had time to shumpo. He vanished from the spot a microsecond before the Cero fired. The beam struck the wall of the cavern. It didn't just melt the rock, it erased it. A tunnel was bored instantly through 10 miles of the Earth's crust, shooting upwards at an angle. The beam broke the surface in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, creating a geyser of steam and water 3 miles high. Ichigo appeared behind Doomsday, slashing at the creature's legs. He needed to immobilize it. The blade connected. Tensor Zangetsu was the sharpest weapon in existence, capable of cutting fate. It sliced through Doomsday's leg, severing the hamstring. Doomsday fell, but before he hit the ground, the bone knitted itself back together. High-speed regeneration. Ichigo's eyes widened. This thing healed faster than all Kiora. Doomsday spun, his fist catching Ichigo in the ribs. The impact was cataclysmic. Even with his Bankai speed and blood ven, Ichigo was sent flying into the nth metal walls. The impact crumpled the indestructible alloy. Ichigo coughed blood inside his mask. The sheer physical weight of the punch was heavier than anything Yami or Kenpachi had ever thrown. This monster had physical strength that rivaled the gravity of a star. On the surface, the Justice League gathered at the coordinates of the breach. Superman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, and the Flash. They were joined by others, Dr. Fate, Zatanna. John Constantine stood on the deck of a Wayne Enterprises ship, smoking a cigarette, looking at the boiling ocean. He sensed the rot rising from the deep. "You lot don't get it," Constantine muttered, the ash from his cigarette flying in the wind. "You're waiting for a monster. That's a ghost down there, and it's wearing the skin of your worst nightmare." Superman looked at the water. "Doomsday is awake," he said, his face pale. "But I can't hear him. I can't hear his heartbeat, because he doesn't have one anymore." Batman's voice came over the comms. "Sensors indicate the target has no biological rhythm. He is animating via an unknown energy source, the same source as the boy." The ocean exploded. Doomsday burst from the water, leaping miles into the air. He did not look like the monster Superman remembered. He was leaner, more armored. A long, white bone tail whipped behind him. His face was fully covered by a horned mask that looked like a demonic skull, and in his chest the black hole swirled, leaking a terrifying red miasma. Ichigo followed him, bursting from the waves in a blur of black speed. They clashed in mid-air, the collision creating a shockwave that flattened the waves for miles. Ichigo was fighting for his life. He swung his sword in a flurry of strikes, each one parried by Doomsday's bone-covered forearms. Sparks of black and red energy rained down. Ichigo realized with dawning horror that the monster was getting faster. It was learning Shumpo. It was mimicking his movements. Doomsday vanished and reappeared behind Ichigo, a clumsy but effective imitation of the high-speed step. He hammered Ichigo with a double fist strike, sending the Soul Reaper crashing into the deck of the ship. The ship groaned and tilted. Ichigo lay in the dented steel, gasping. The air was thick with the monster's Reiatsu. It was suffocating. It felt like a perversion of nature. "Get back!" Ichigo screamed at the heroes hovering above. "Don't touch him. He'll eat you. Superman didn't listen. He couldn't watch a boy be beaten to death. He dove, eyes glowing with heat vision. He unleashed a full intensity blast at Doomsday's face. The laser hit the bone mask. The mask didn't melt. It absorbed the heat, glowing white, then converting it. Doomsday opened his mouth and roared. A sonic scream mixed with a bala blast erupted. Superman was hit point blank. The Man of Steel was knocked out of the sky, tumbling end over end until he skipped across the water's surface. Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter attacked in tandem. Diana used her lasso, trying to bind the beast. The lasso of truth wrapped around Doomsday. Usually, the magic of the lasso could hold gods. But Doomsday's mind was now a hollow void. There was no truth to bind. The chaotic spiritual pressure corroded the magic. The golden rope turned grey and brittle. Doomsday flexed, and the lasso of truth snapped. Diana gasped, the feedback of the broken magic hitting her like a whip crack. Martian Manhunter tried to enter Doomsday's mind to shut it down. He screamed instantly, clutching his head. "There is no mind," John shouted telepathically to everyone. "It is a hunger, infinite hunger." Ichigo stood up on the deck of the sinking ship. He wiped the blood from his mouth. He looked at the monster. He looked at the heroes failing to stop it. He realized that this was his fault. He had created this. He had turned their greatest villain into something worse. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders, heavier than the gravity of the planet. He had to fix this, even if it killed him. He reached up and touched his face. "I have to," he whispered. He didn't want to use his mask. He was afraid that if he hollowfied now, he would lose himself to the same hunger that drove Doomsday. But he needed the power. He needed to fight fire with fire. He clawed his hand down his face. The black and white energy surged. His own mask formed. The eyes turned yellow and black. Ichigo roared, a dual-tone sound that harmonized with Doomsday's scream. The clash that followed was invisible to the human eye. Ichigo and hollow Doomsday moved across the sky as streaks of light. Black lightning met red lightning. The sky turned purple. The clouds evaporated. Every time they collided, the fabric of reality tore a little more. Small rifts opened, exposing the void between dimensions. Dr. Fate, floating near the perimeter, raised his hands. "They are breaking the seal of the world," Fate intoned. "If they continue, the bleed will consume the earth." Fate cast a spell, attempting to create a mirror dimension to contain the fight. The golden walls of the dimension rose up, enclosing the two combatants. Inside the mirror dimension, the physics were reinforced by magic. Ichigo felt the shift. He pushed Doomsday back with a Getsuga that spanned the horizon. Doomsday crashed into a reflection of Metropolis. The buildings shattered like glass. Ichigo landed on a rooftop. He was panting. His mask was cracking. He couldn't keep this up. Doomsday rose from the rubble. The monster was evolving again. Spikes grew from his shoulders, shaping themselves into thrusters. He was adapting to air combat. He was becoming a perfect aerial predator. Doomsday charged a Tero, but this time he condensed it. He compressed the energy into a small bead on the tip of his finger. A bala? No, it was a Shero Oscurus. Ichigo recognized the technique. It was the same move Ulquiorra used. Doomsday had learned it just by being hit by Ichigo's energy. The beam fired. It was a lance of absolute darkness. Ichigo didn't dodge. He couldn't. The beam was too wide. He crossed his sword to block. The impact drove him backward, carving a trench through the mirror city. The heat was intense. His coat burned. His skin blistered. He held the line, pouring every ounce of his Reiatsu into the blade to keep from being disintegrated. "Is that all you have?" Ichigo screamed. his voice breaking. He was taunting a mindless beast, trying to draw its focus. Suddenly, a green light pierced the mirror dimension. Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, refusing to sit on the sidelines, had used his ring to drill a hole through fate's magic. "Kid, move," Hal shouted. He unleashed a construct, a massive green freight train filled with missiles. It slammed into Doomsday. The explosion was deafening. It bought Ichigo a second. Ichigo dropped the mask. He couldn't sustain it. He looked at Hal. "You shouldn't be here." "We don't leave people behind," Hal said, hovering beside him. "I don't care where you're from. You're fighting him. That makes you an ally." "He's not just a monster," Ichigo gasped. "He's a mirror. He reflects power. You can't beat him with force." "Then we beat him with tricks," Hal said. "Batman has a plan. We need to get him to the transporter. We're sending him to the Phantom Zone." "It won't work," Ichigo said. "He's a hollow now. He can eat dimensions. If you put him in the zone, he'll eat the ghost there. He'll come back stronger." "Then what do we do?" Hal asked, the green light of his shield flickering as Doomsday pounded on it. "We have to sever the chain," Ichigo said. He looked at the hole in Doomsday's chest. "It's not a chain anymore. It's a void. I have to fill it. I have to overfeed him." "Overfeed him?" Hal asked. "With what?" "With me," Ichigo said grimly. Before Hal could argue, Ichigo launched himself back into the fight. He didn't swing his sword. He tackled Doomsday. He grabbed the bone horns of the monster's mask. He stared into the empty eye sockets. Doomsday thrashed, clawing at Ichigo's back. The blood vein held, but barely. Ichigo flared his Reiatsu to its maximum. He wasn't releasing it as an attack. He was pouring it directly into Doomsday's hollow hole. He was feeding the beast pure, concentrated spirit energy. Doomsday froze. The influx of energy was overwhelming. It was like trying to drink a river from a fire hose. His body began to swell. The grey skin cracked, revealing glowing blue light underneath. Doomsday roared, but the sound was choked. He was overdosing on power. "Eat it," Ichigo screamed, his own eyes rolling back in his head. "Take it all." The mirror dimension began to crack. The energy output was exceeding the magical container. Dr. Fate struggled to hold the spell. "The structure is failing," Fate yelled. "Brace for collapse." The mirror shattered. Ichigo and Doomsday fell back into the real world, splashing into the Atlantic. But the reaction didn't stop. Doomsday was glowing like a second sun beneath the waves. The water boiled away for miles. A pillar of steam rose into the stratosphere. Then, silence. The light faded. The heroes waited. Superman, recovered and hovering, scanned the water with X-ray vision. He saw a body floating. It was Ichigo. He was unconscious, his bunkai deactivated, his shihakusho tattered. There was no sign of Doomsday. "Did he destroy it?" Flash asked, vibrating on the surface of the water. "No," Batman said, monitoring the satellites. "He didn't destroy it. He changed it." Deep below the waves, sinking into the darkness, Doomsday drifted. He was not dead, but he was different. The bone armor had receded. The hole in his chest had closed, filled with a pulsating crystal of blue energy. Ichigo's Reiatsu had bonded with Doomsday's biology, creating a stable fusion. Doomsday opened his eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a beast. They were clear, they were intelligent, and they were brown. Doomsday had achieved a resurrection in the Arrancar sense. He had gained a human form. He looked like a hulking, grey-skinned man, naked and muscular, with a fragment of a skull mask on his left temple. He looked at his hands. He felt the power humming inside him. It wasn't rage anymore. It was purpose. He looked up at the surface, at the heroes who had hunted him. He felt a connection to the orange-haired boy, a bond of reishi. On the surface, Superman swooped down and lifted Ichigo from the water. The boy was light, surprisingly so. Superman looked at the boy's face. It was peaceful for the first time since he arrived. "He's alive," Superman said, "but his heartbeat is faint." "We need to get him to the Watchtower," Wonder Woman said. "He needs healing. And then we need answers," Batman added. "Because whatever he did to Doomsday, it's not over." Zatanna floated over to Batman. "Bruce," she said softly, "the air, it's clearing." It was true. The heavy, depression-inducing atmosphere that Ichigo had brought with him was fading. The grey tint to the world was returning to colour. By dumping his vast reserves of Reiatsu into Doomsday, Ichigo had inadvertently scrubbed the atmosphere. He had cured the infection by giving it all to one host. "He sacrificed his power to save the city," Superman said, looking at the boy with new respect. "Or he just armed a bomb," Batman replied. In the shadows of the deep ocean, the new entity that was once Doomsday began to swim. He didn't swim toward the heroes. He swam toward the shore, toward Gotham. He needed clothes. He needed to think. He had the memories of a monster and the soul of a god. He was something new, a vasto lord, born of Kryptonian DNA. The chaotic variable of Ichigo had been neutralized for the moment, drained and unconscious. But in doing so, he had birthed a new player in the cosmic game. The DC universe had survived the infection, but now it had to deal with the mutation. And in the Hall of Justice, the contingency plans were already being burned, because none of them accounted for a Doomsday who could think, who could feel, and who could use a Shero. As the Justice League flew the unconscious boy into space, the world below took a breath, but it was a shallow breath. The laws of physics were still bruised. The magic of the world was still shivering. And somewhere in a dark alley in Gotham, a grey hand reached out and picked up a discarded trench coat. The collision of worlds was no longer just an event. It was a person, and he was hungry. The black blade of Tensor Zangetsu lay on the sterile white examination table in the deep containment sector of the Watchtower. It did not look like a weapon of mass destruction. It looked like a simple, elegant katana, the black finish absorbing the harsh laboratory light. But to the sensors lining the walls, it was a singularity. The sword was generating a gravitational field of its own, a subtle pull that warped the laser grids monitoring it. Batman stood behind 3 inches of promethium glass, his cowl removed, his eyes narrowed at the readouts. The sword was not emitting radiation, heat, or electromagnetic pulses. It was emitting a signal that the computer could only interpret as a distress call. The signal was a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, but much slower. 1 beat every minute, and with every beat, the ambient temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. Bruce Wayne had seen magical weapons before. He had catalogued the Sword of Athena, the Trident of Poseidon, and the hell-forged blades of Apocalypse. But those were objects of power. This sword was different. The molecular scans indicated that the metal was not metal at all. It was compressed spirit matter, identical to the boy's biological structure. The sword was not a tool. It was a limb that had been severed. And like a severed limb, it was dying. But a sword with the density of a neutron star does not die quietly. As the connection to its master faded, the sword was becoming unstable. The chain spirit inside was waking up, and it was panicking. In the medical bay, 3 decks up, Ichigo Kurosaki opened his eyes. He did not gasp. He did not sit up. He simply opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. He felt empty. The ocean of power that usually roared in his veins was gone, drained away into the monster he had fought. He felt light, impossibly light, as if gravity had forgotten him. He tried to sense his sword. He reached out with his mind, seeking the familiar presence of Zangetsu. He felt a dull ache in the back of his mind, a severed connection that throbbed like a phantom limb. He tried to sit up. His body was stiff, wrapped in bioregenerative bandages that glowed with Kryptonian technology. He looked to his left. Superman was sitting in a chair, floating slightly off the ground, reading a datapad. The man of steel looked up, his expression gentle but guarded. Ichigo asked where his sword was. His voice was a rasp, dry and cracked. Superman placed the datapad down. He explained that the weapon had been secured for safety. He explained that Ichigo had been unconscious for 12 hours. He explained that the entity known as Doomsday was missing, but the atmospheric toxicity had cleared. Superman spoke with the calm authority of a man who had saved the world 1,000 times. But Ichigo stopped listening after the first sentence. They had taken his sword. They had separated a Shinigami from his Zanpakuto, in a universe where the Reishi balance was already critical. Ichigo swung his legs off the bed. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Superman caught him, his grip firm but careful. Ichigo pushed him away, stumbling back against the bed. He told Superman that they had to give it back. He told him that the sword wasn't just a piece of metal, it was alive, and if it was separated from him for too long in this dense, crushing reality, it would start to leak. Superman tried to reassure him. He told Ichigo that Batman was analyzing it. He told him that they needed to understand the energy source before they could return it. He asked Ichigo to trust them. Ichigo laughed, a dry, bitter sound. He asked how he could trust them when they didn't understand the first thing about souls. He explained that the sword contained a spirit, a king. If the king felt abandoned, he would start to hollowfie. He would start to consume the space around him to survive. Ichigo's panic was rising, not for himself, but for the station. He knew what happened when a Zanpakuto spirit went berserk. He had fought Muramasa. He had fought his own inner demon. Meanwhile, in the dark, rain-slick streets of Gotham City, the entity that had been Doomsday walked. He wore a trench coat, stolen from a dumpster. The collar pulled up to hide the bone fragments on his face. He was large, nearly 7 feet tall, but he no longer had the hulking, ape-like proportions of the monster. He was compact, dense, his grey skin hidden under the clothes. He walked with a fluid grace that was terrifying to behold. He did not stomp, he glided. He was hungry, but not for meat. He was hungry for experience. He was hungry for context. The intelligence Ichigo had inadvertently gifted him was a chaotic mix of Doomsday's survival instincts and Ichigo's combat intuition, welded together by the structure of an Arrancar's mind. He turned into an alleyway in the Narrows. A group of men stood around a burning barrel counting money. They were armed, thugs working for Two-Face. They saw the large figure approach and drew their weapons. They told him to turn around. They told him this was private property. The entity stopped. He looked at the gun in the lead thug's hand. He analyzed it. Projectile weapon, chemical propellant, kinetic impact, negligible threat. He looked at the man holding it. He smelled the man's fear. It smelled like vinegar and copper. It was delicious. The thug fired. The bullet struck the entity in the forehead. It flattened against the grey skin and fell to the pavement. The entity did not blink. He reached out, his movement a blur of sonido, and grabbed the gun. He crushed it into powder with one hand. The thug screamed and ran. The entity did not pursue. He didn't need to kill them. He needed to understand them. He picked up the flattened bullet. He looked at it. He realized that this world was fragile. Everything in it broke so easily. He felt a pang of loneliness. The only thing that hadn't broken was the boy with the orange hair. He touched the center of his chest, where the blue crystal pulsed beneath his shirt. He felt the connection. The boy was far away, in the sky, and the boy was weak. The entity frowned. The predator instinct told him to find the weak link and cull it. But the new instinct, the Arankar instinct, told him something else. It told him that the boy was his creator, and you do not kill your creator until you have surpassed him. Back on the Watchtower, the situation in the containment lab was deteriorating. Batman watched as the sensors spiked. The sword was vibrating. A low, dissonant hum began to emanate from the blade, audible even through the glass. It sounded like a choir of thousands screaming in a tunnel. The white grip of the katana began to turn black. The chain on the hilt rattled, defying gravity, floating upward like a snake. Batman tapped his comms. He ordered an evacuation of the science deck. He initiated the Omega Protocol for containment. He activated the stasis field, a bubble of frozen time designed to hold any physical or energy-based reaction. The stasis field snapped into place around Tensor Zangetsu. For a second, the humming stopped. The sword hung suspended in the amber light of the field. Batman exhaled. But the laws of this universe were being rewritten. The sword was not just matter. It was will. And the will inside the sword, the spirit of Reiatsu, the old man Zangetsu, was not subject to the laws of time in a dimension that had no concept of the Quincy King. The stasis field began to crack, not the glass, but the field itself. Spiderwebs of black energy spread across the amber light. The sword was cutting time. Ichigo felt it. He fell to his knees in the infirmary, clutching his chest. He screamed. It wasn't pain. It was the sensation of his soul being ripped in half. Superman grabbed him. He asked what was happening. Ichigo gasped out one word. He said the name of his sword. He said that the old man was angry. He said that he was trying to break out. Superman didn't wait. He grabbed Ichigo and flew him through the corridors of the Watchtower, smashing through the doors, heading for the lab. He realized that separating the boy from the weapon had been a catastrophic mistake. They had treated the sword like a gun, but it was an organ. In the lab, the stasis field shattered. The explosion of spiritual pressure blew out the reinforced glass. Batman was thrown back against the wall, his armor locking up to protect him from the concussion. The room was filled with a thick, suffocating black smoke. From the smoke, a shape began to form. It was not the sword. The sword had dissolved into pure reishi. The shape that stood in the center of the wreckage was a man. He was tall, with long, flowing black hair and a thick beard. He wore a long black cloak that seemed to be made of the void itself. He wore glasses that reflected no light. Old man Zangetsu stood in the Watchtower. He looked around with eyes that saw every possible future. He saw the timeline where the station exploded. He saw the timeline where Batman died. He saw the timeline where Ichigo was dissected. He stepped forward. The floor plates buckled under his spiritual weight. He did not speak. He raised his hand. A blade of blue reishi formed in the air, a massive broadsword of pure energy. He was manifesting to protect the core. He was manifesting because Ichigo was too weak to hold him, so he was holding himself. Batman struggled to his feet. He saw the figure. He threw 3 explosive batarangs. They detonated on the figure's cloak. The smoke cleared, and the figure was unharmed. The cloak had absorbed the kinetic energy. Zangetsu looked at Batman. He did not see a hero. He saw a man in a costume who had imprisoned him. Zangetsu swung the energy blade. The slash was lazy, almost dismissive, but it cleaved the entire laboratory module in half. The hull of the Watchtower groaned. Air rushed out into the vacuum of space. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, sealing the breach. Batman grappled to a support beam, holding on as the room decompressed. He stared at the figure. This was a construct, a hard light projection. No, it was a soul projection. Superman and Ichigo arrived at the airlock of the sealed sector. Superman saw the damage through the window. He saw the man in the black cloak. Ichigo saw him too. Ichigo pounded on the glass. He shouted for the old man to stop. He shouted that they were friends. Zangetsu turned his head. He looked at Ichigo. His expression was one of profound sadness. He spoke, his voice vibrating through the hull of the station, heard not by ears but by bones. He said that these men were not friends. He said they were jailers. He said that this world was a cage, and he would not let Ichigo die in a cage. The small choice had been made hours ago. The decision to analyze the sword instead of returning it immediately. The massive multiversal outcome was now unfolding. Zangetsu was not just breaking out. He was rewriting the environment to suit his existence. The reishi he was releasing was transforming the metal of the Watchtower. The walls began to bleach white. The floor turned to white sand. The technology of the Justice League was being overwritten by the geography of Huecomundo. The Watchtower was being terraformed into a spirit world. In the House of Mystery, somewhere in the pocket dimension, between dreams and reality, John Constantine woke up screaming. He fell out of his bed, tangling in the sheets. He scrambled for a cigarette, his hands shaking. Zatanna rushed into the room, her hands glowing with prepared spells. She asked what was wrong. Constantine pointed up. He pointed past the ceiling, past the sky. He said the door was open. He said that the grave was leaking. He explained that the concept of death in the DC universe was handled by the Black Racer, or Necron, or Death of the Endless. It was a bureaucracy. But what was happening now was an invasion of a different kind of death. A wild, unmanaged death. The space station, Constantine rasped, lighting the cigarette. It's becoming a beacon. It's shining a light into the void. And things are looking back. Back on the Watchtower, the situation escalated. The Justice League assembled. Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, Cyborg, and Green Lantern arrived at the containment sector. They saw the intruder. They saw the white sand spreading through the corridors. They saw the walls turning into white quartz trees. It was surreal. A technological marvel was turning into a desolate desert. "We have to contain him," Wonder Woman said, drawing her sword. "He is destroying the station." "Wait," Ichigo screamed, held back by Superman. "If you fight him, he'll destroy everything. He's not an enemy. He's me. He's the part of me that protects." "He just sliced the hull open, kid," Green Lantern said, creating a massive barrier to stop the spread of the sand. "That doesn't look like protection. That looks like a hostile takeover." Cyborg interfaced with the station's computer. "I'm losing control of the environmental systems," he reported, his robotic eye spinning. "The matter conversion is spreading. It's rewriting the code of the station. It's turning the computer into spirit particles. I can't hack a ghost, Batman." Batman, who had managed to escape the decompressed lab and join the group, looked at Ichigo. "How do we stop it?" he demanded. "If we can't fight it, how do we turn it off?" "I have to accept him," Ichigo said. "I have to take the sword back. I have to merge with him again. But I can't get close. The pressure is too high. Without my powers, I'll be crushed by my own soul." It was a paradox. To stop the destruction, Ichigo needed his powers. To get his powers, he had to enter the destruction. Then, the second catastrophe occurred. The massive output of reishi from Zangetsu, combined with the earlier dimensional breach caused by Ichigo's arrival, attracted a predator. Not a shark, not a hollow, a cosmic predator. The Phantom Zone projector stored in the trophy room 3 sectors away, activated. It was not turned on by anyone. It was resonated by the frequency of the spiritual pressure. The Phantom Zone was a dimension of bodiless spirits, criminals of Krypton who existed as phantoms. The Bleach universe defined phantoms as pluses or hollows. The physics of the two universes collided in the lens of the projector. The projector fired. It didn't open a window. It shattered the wall between dimensions. A tear ripped open in the middle of the Watchtower promenade. From the tear, the prisoners of the Phantom Zone poured out. But they were not the Kryptonian ghosts Superman knew. As they passed through the tear, contaminated by the reishi-rich atmosphere Zangetsu was creating, they changed. General Zod led them. He drifted out of the rift. He was translucent, grey. But as he entered the white sand environment, a mask began to form on his face. It was a mask of jagged bone. A hole blew open in his chest. Zod screamed, a sound that shattered the reinforced glass of the observation deck. He was no longer just a Kryptonian general. He was an Arankar, a vasto lord, with the genetic memory of a sun god. Non and Ursa followed him, transforming instantly, then a dozen more. The worst criminals in the galaxy, trapped in a dimension of eternal boredom, were suddenly given physical form and infinite hunger. The Watchtower was no longer a superhero base. It was a hunting ground. New plan, Batman said, his voice grim. Evacuate the station. Crash it into the sun. We can't, Superman shouted. Ichigo is here, and if those things get to Earth, they are Kryptonians, Wonder Woman said, staring at the horror of Holozod. With the powers of demons, if they reach the planet, they will feed on the entire human race. Ichigo looked at the chaos. He saw Zangetsu standing alone in the distance, holding the line against the encroaching hollows. The old man was fighting the Kryptonian ghosts, protecting Ichigo even from afar. Blue slashes of energy decimated the lower-level phantoms, but Zod was strong. Zod caught a blade of energy with his bare hand and crushed it. Ichigo realized there was only one choice, a choice that would likely kill him. He looked at Superman. Throw me, Ichigo said. What? Superman asked. Throw me at Zangetsu, Ichigo commanded. I need to touch the sword. I need to take it back. If I die, I die. But if I don't, we all die. Superman looked at the boy. He saw the resolve in his eyes. It was the same look Clark saw in the mirror every morning. The willingness to burn for others. Aim for the chest, Ichigo said. Superman grabbed Ichigo by the back of his shirt and the belt of his pants. He spun once, generating momentum, and hurled the boy. Ichigo flew through the air like a missile. He crossed the promenade, soaring over the white sand, past the screaming Holozod, past the fighting heroes. He flew straight toward the dark figure of old man Zangetsu. Zangetsu saw him coming. The spirit lowered his sword. He opened his arms. He did not dodge. He accepted the boy. Ichigo slammed into the spirit. There was a blinding flash of blue light. The figure of the old man dissolved, swirling into a vortex of black and blue energy that was sucked into Ichigo's chest. The sword, Tensor Zangetsu, materialized in Ichigo's hand. The connection was restored. The floodgates opened. But it wasn't just his old power. The exposure to the DC universe, the stress of the separation, and the desperate adaptation of his soul had forced an evolution. Ichigo didn't just regain his Bankai. He pulled the Reishi from the environment back into himself. The white sand on the floor dissolved and rushed into him. The quartz trees vaporized and fueled him. Ichigo stood up. The bandages on his body shredded. His Shihakusho reformed, blacker than a black hole, weaving itself from the shadows of the room. He held the sword. The chain on the hilt wrapped around his arm. He looked at Zod. Zod looked at him. The hollow mask on Zod's face grinned. "Kneel," Zod hissed. His voice a distortion of Kryptonian pride and hollow hunger. "Kneel before Zod." Ichigo raised his sword. He didn't smile. He didn't taunt. He simply exerted his spiritual pressure. The gravity on the Watchtower multiplied by 1,000. The floor plates flattened. The weaker hollows were instantly crushed into the deck. The Justice League, even with their immense strength, felt the air leave their lungs. Superman dropped to one knee, shocked by the sheer weight of the presence. "I don't know who you are," Ichigo said, his voice echoing with the power of a death god. "But this is my sword, and you are in my way." Ichigo vanished. He didn't use Shumpo. He moved between the seconds. He appeared in front of Zod. He swung. Zod blocked with his forearm, his iron-hard Kryptonian skin coated in hierro. The impact shook the entire station. A shockwave blew out the windows of the promenade, exposing them to space. The artificial gravity failed. Heroes, villains, and debris floated in the vacuum. But the fight did not stop. Ichigo and Zod fought in the silence of space. Two gods from different cosmologies clashing above the earth. Every strike created ripples of distorted light. Below, on Earth, the Doomsday Iron car in Gotham stopped walking. He looked up at the night sky. He saw the new star flashing in orbit. He felt the calling. His brother was fighting, and his father was fighting. The entity smiled, revealing a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth. He crouched. The pavement beneath him shattered. He launched himself into the air, creating a sonic boom that shattered windows for 10 blocks. He was not flying. He was jumping. He was jumping toward space. He was going to join the family reunion. The Watchtower in ruins, the Phantom Zone breached, and a 3-way war beginning in orbit between a Shinigami, a hollowfied Kryptonian general, and an evolving Doomsday. The small choice to study a sword had resulted in the weaponization of the afterlife. The containment had failed. The escalation was total, and the earth below watched as the gods fell from the sky, burning like meteors. The era of secret containment was over. The war for the soul of the universe had just gone public. The vacuum of space above the earth was no longer silent. It was screaming. The debris of the Justice League Watchtower floated in a chaotic cloud of white metal and quartz dust, a graveyard of technology that had been overwritten by the spiritual pressure of a single sword. In the center of this debris field, two gods clashed with a violence that defied the laws of physics. Ichigo Kurosaki, clad in the tattered black robes of his Bankai, moved like a stroke of ink across a canvas of stars. General Zod, now a horrific fusion of Kryptonian physiology and vasto Lauder evolution, met him blow for blow. Zod's grey skin was armoured in white bone, his cape torn and billowing in a solar wind that did not exist. His eyes burned with a fire that was not heat vision, but a concentrated beam of spiritual hunger. When Zod punched, he did not just displace matter. He shattered the local space-time. His fist collided with Ichigo's sword, and the impact created a ripple of distortion that knocked satellites out of orbit 3,000 miles away. Ichigo gritted his teeth, the blood from his forehead floating in zero gravity as red spheres. He was faster than Zod. his shunpo allowing him to flicker in and out of existence between the seconds. But Zod was durable beyond comprehension. The Kryptonian cells were metabolizing the yellow sun radiation and converting it instantly into Reiatsu. Zod was an infinite engine of destruction. He did not tire. He did not slow down. With every second he spent under the sun, his spiritual pressure doubled. Zod roared, a sound transmitted through the Reishi-thickened vacuum. He opened his mouth, and the jaw of his bone mask unhinged. A sphere of red and black energy formed, crackling with the intensity of a dying star. It was a Zero, but powered by the solar reserves of a Kryptonian. Ichigo recognized the threat instantly. If that beam hit the Earth, it wouldn't just destroy a city, it would ignite the atmosphere. Ichigo flashed above Zod, raising Tensor Zangetsu high. He didn't shout the name of his attack. He didn't have the breath. He simply poured his soul into the blade and swung. The black Getsuga Tensho erupted, a crescent moon of void energy that swallowed the light of the stars. The two beams collided. The Tero and the Getsuga met in a point of singularity. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, the explosion blossomed. It was a sphere of annihilation that expanded outward, vaporizing the remaining debris of the Watchtower. Superman, Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman, who were fighting the lesser Phantom Zone ghosts on the periphery, were blown backward by the shockwave. Hal Jordan's construct shield shattered. Superman was hurled toward the moon, skipping across the lunar surface like a stone. The light of the explosion was visible from the surface of the Earth, a second sun flaring in the night sky, turning midnight into noon for 3 terrifying seconds. Ichigo was thrown back, his coat shredded, his skin burning from the radiation. He stabilized himself against a piece of floating bulkhead. He was panting. His reserves were deep, but he was fighting a battery that never ran dry. Zod emerged from the smoke, laughing. His armor was cracked, his chest smoking, but the wounds were already closing. The high-speed regeneration of the Hollow combined with the solar healing of the Kryptonian was a cheat code written by a mad god. Zod flew toward Ichigo, his speed increasing. He prepared to finish the boy, but he never reached him. A grey blur slammed into Zod from below, striking him with the force of an asteroid impact. It was not a projectile. It was a person. Doomsday had arrived. The entity that had jumped from Gotham City had broken the escape velocity of the planet through sheer physical strength and had intercepted the fight in orbit. Doomsday crashed into Zod, his claws digging into the general's shoulders. They spun through space, a tangle of grey limbs and bone spikes. Doomsday bit into Zod's neck, his teeth tearing through the hierro and drawing glowing green blood. Zod screamed in fury, blasting heat vision from his eyes into Doomsday's face. Doomsday didn't flinch. His own mask, the fragment of skull on his temple, pulsed with blue light. He absorbed the heat. He fed on it. Doomsday was the third variable, the chaotic neutral in a war of order and conquest. He hated Kryptonians. It was written in his genetic code. But he also felt the pull of the Reishi, the connection to Ichigo. He was a monster fighting for territory, and space was his new jungle. Ichigo watched them tumble, realizing the scale of the nightmare. He had not just brought a sword to a fist fight. He had introduced a plague that was rewriting the apex predators of this universe. He looked down at the Earth. The Phantom Zone rift on the ruins of the Watchtower was still open, bleeding ghosts into the orbit. The atmosphere below was swirling with unnatural storms. The pressure of the three-way battle was causing tidal waves in the Pacific and earthquakes in Japan. The world was cracking under the weight of their souls. Batman's voice cut through the static in Ichigo's ear. The dark night was in a deep spacer tactical suit, floating near the wreckage of the teleporter pad. His voice was calm, the calm of a man who had accepted that death was a probability, but refused to let it be a certainty. He told Ichigo that they could not win a war of attrition. He explained that Zod was getting stronger every second. He said that the only way to stop this was to close the door. They had to seal the Phantom Zone. But the projector was damaged, fused with the spiritual matter of the station. It needed a power source to reverse the polarity. It needed a soul strong enough to act as the lock. Ichigo looked at the fighting monsters. He looked at the rift. He understood. He gripped his sword. He told Batman to get the others to safety. He told him to clear the blast radius. Batman paused. He asked what Ichigo intended to do. Ichigo didn't answer. He just moved. He flew toward the rift. The Phantom Zone tear was a jagged wound in space, leaking grey miasma. Hundreds of smaller hollow ghosts were clawing their way out. Ichigo didn't slow down. He flared his Reiatsu, expanding it into a massive aura of crushing weight. The lesser ghosts froze. They felt the presence of a king. Ichigo swung his sword in a wide arc, decapitating a dozen ghosts in one motion. He hovered in front of the rift, acting as a living cork in the bottle. But Zod saw him. Zod threw Doomsday off him, hurling the grey beast into a passing satellite. Zod focused on Ichigo. He realized what the boy was doing. He realized the boy was trying to cut off the reinforcements. Zod flew at Ichigo, his eyes glowing. He shouted that this world belonged to the strong. He shouted that he would turn Earth into a graveyard for the weak. He fired another Zero, this one larger than the last. Ichigo couldn't dodge. If he dodged, the beam would hit the rift and tear it open further, or worse, hit the Earth. He had to tank it. He raised his sword. He summoned the mask. The horned Vasto Lord mask formed over his face in a burst of blood and black energy. Ichigo roared, a sound that drowned out the silence of space. He caught the Zero with his bare hand and his sword. The energy pushed him back. His heels dug into the invisible floor of the vacuum. His skin blistered. The bones in his arm cracked. But he held it. He crushed the Zero in his grip, dissipating the energy into sparks. Then Doomsday returned. But he didn't attack Zod. He stopped. He hovered between the two combatants. The Arrancar Doomsday looked at Ichigo. He looked at the mask. He recognized it. It was the face of the one who had fed him. Doomsday turned his head slowly and looked at Zod. A low growl started in his throat. It was not a growl of hate. It was a growl of recognition. Doomsday raised his hand. He pointed a finger at Zod. A blue light gathered at the tip. It was a Zero, but it was different. It was spinning. It was a Zero that incorporated the piercing nature of a Bala. Doomsday fired. The blue beam pierced Zod's shoulder, punching a clean hole through the Kryptonian armor. Zod staggered. Ichigo seized the moment. He didn't attack Zod. He attacked the rift. He turned his back on the enemy and plunged his sword into the tear in space. Bankai, Ichigo whispered. Even though he was already in it, he was pushing it further. Saigo no Getsuga Tensho. He wasn't using the final Getsuga that would strip him of his powers permanently. He couldn't afford to lose everything yet. He was using the principle of it. He was becoming the Getsuga. He was turning his physical body into a binding agent. Black chains erupted from Ichigo's body. They were the chains of Tensa Zangetsu, multiplied by the millions. They shot into the rift, hooking onto the edges of the dimension. They shot out into space, wrapping around the debris, wrapping around the very fabric of the localized reality. And they wrapped around Zod. Zod tried to fly away, but the chains were not physical. They were made of gravity and fate. They caught his ankles. They caught his wings. They dragged him toward the rift. Zod screamed, thrashing, using his immense strength to pull against the anchor. He was strong enough to pull planets, but he couldn't pull against the weight of the Soul Society's logic. Ichigo was imposing the concept of hell onto the Phantom Zone. He was turning the prison into a pit. "You cannot hold me," Zod bellowed. "I am a god. You're just a ghost," Ichigo gritted out through his mask. "And ghosts go back in the box." Ichigo pulled. The chains tightened. Zod was dragged inch by inch toward the tear. Doomsday watched, motionless. He seemed to understand that this was a sealing ritual. He drifted back, respecting the territory of the Alpha. But Zod had one card left. He looked at the earth below. If he couldn't rule it, he would break it. He began to glow. His body started to expand. He was initiating a bionuclear self-destruct. He was going to release all the solar energy stored in his cells in one suicidal blast. The explosion would wipe out the orbital plane and irradiate the planet for 10,000 years. "If I go, I take the world," Zod laughed, his body swelling, the bone armor cracking to reveal blinding white light underneath. Superman, recovering from his fall to the moon, saw the light. He flew back toward the fight at maximum speed, but he knew he wouldn't make it in time. Wonder Woman and Green Lantern were too far away. The bomb was primed. Ichigo saw the light too. He felt the build-up. He knew the chains wouldn't stop the explosion. They would just contain the shrapnel. He needed to smother the blast. He needed to cover the grenade. Ichigo let go of the rift. The chains went slack. Zod stopped being dragged. He laughed triumphantly, but then Ichigo was in front of him. Ichigo wrapped his arms around Zod. He hugged the monster. "What are you doing?" Zod hissed, the energy leaking from his eyes. "Sharing," Ichigo said. Ichigo didn't try to stop the explosion. He absorbed it. He opened his own soul, his own reservoir of reishi, and he created a vacuum. He used the same technique he had used on Doomsday, but in reverse. He wasn't feeding Zod. He was eating him. He was draining the kinetic and solar energy out of Zod and converting it into spiritual pressure inside his own body. It was agony. It felt like swallowing the sun. Ichigo's skin turned black, then white, then transparent. His internal organs burned away and reformed in milliseconds. The mask on his face shattered, then reformed, then shattered again. He was metabolizing a nuclear event. Zod screamed as his power was drained. He shrank. The light faded. The bomb was diffused, siphoned into the boy. Zod was left empty, a husk of grey skin and bone. He looked at Ichigo with terror. He had met a being that could eat a sun. Ichigo, glowing with an unsafe amount of energy, eyes burning with blue fire, grabbed Zod by the face. He turned and threw him. He threw him straight into the Phantom Zone rift. Zod tumbled into the void, silent, powerless. Ichigo turned to the rift. He grabbed the edges of the tear with his bare hands. The energy he had absorbed from Zod was trying to tear him apart. He needed to release it. He screamed and slammed his hands together. He used Zod's stolen power to weld the dimension shut. A massive clap of thunder echoed in space. The rift zipped closed, leaving a scar of white energy that faded into the black. The silence returned. Ichigo floated in the void. He was smoking. His uniform was gone, replaced by bandages of pure energy that was slowly unraveling. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He felt sick. He felt heavy. He had absorbed so much foreign energy. Kryptonian solar radiation, Doomsday's rage, Zod's despair, that his own soul felt contaminated. He wasn't just a Shinigami anymore. He was a living reactor of conflicting physics. He looked up. Doomsday was still there. The Arrancar stood on a piece of floating debris, watching him. The blue crystal in Doomsday's chest pulsed in rhythm with Ichigo's heart. Doomsday nodded, once. It was a warrior's acknowledgement. Then, the beast turned and kicked off the debris. He didn't fly toward the earth. He flew toward the dark side of the moon. He sought solitude. He sought a place to evolve. He was leaving the battlefield, but he was not leaving the war. The Justice League arrived a moment later. Superman, battered and bruised, floated up to Ichigo. He reached out a hand. Ichigo flinched. He pulled back. He looked at Superman with eyes that were tired and old. "Don't touch me," Ichigo whispered. "I'm full. If you touch me, I might burn you." Superman stopped. He saw the aura around the boy. It was radioactive with spiritual pressure. The boy had saved the world, but he had become a hazard in the process. "We can help you," Superman said, his voice pleading. "We have containment suits. We have magic." "I don't think magic works on this," Ichigo said, looking at his chest. A chain had appeared there, a new chain. It wasn't connected to a body. It was connected to the void where the Watchtower used to be. He was anchored to this location. He had become the linchpin that held the dimensional tear closed. If he moved, the rift might open again. "I can't go down there," Ichigo said, looking at the earth. "I'm too heavy now. If I stand on the ground, I'll crush it. I'll make everyone sick again." Wonder Woman floated beside Superman. She saw the truth. "He is right, Cal. He has become a titan. He bears the weight of the sky." "So what? We leave him here?" Flash asked, his voice cracking over the comms. "He's just a kid." "I'm not a kid," Ichigo said softly. "I'm a soul reaper, and this is my post." He turned away from them. He sat down in the empty space, crossing his legs in the air. He placed Tensor Zangetsu across his knees. He closed his eyes. He began to meditate. He began the long, slow process of digesting the sun he had swallowed, of purifying the corruption he had absorbed. It might take a year. It might take a century. "Go," Ichigo said. "Rebuild your station. I'll keep the ghosts away." The Justice League watched him for a long time. They saw the lonely figure silhouetted against the stars, a guardian who had exiled himself to save the people he had barely met. Superman wanted to argue, but Batman's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "He's made the tactical choice," Batman said, though his voice lacked its usual coldness. "He is containment. We don't break containment." They retreated. They returned to Earth to heal the wounded, to calm the panicked cities, to bury the dead. They left Ichigo Kurosaki alone in the cold. But he was not entirely alone. On the dark side of the moon, Doomsday sat in a crater. He could feel the pulse of the boy. He closed his eyes and began to meditate too, mimicking the Creator. A strange, silent bond formed between the earth and the moon, a binary system of monsters who were trying to be men. And on Earth, the consequences of the convergence began to settle in. The infection was gone, but the immunity was changed. People who had been exposed to the Reiatsu sickness didn't just recover, they changed. In Metropolis, a child looked at a ghost standing on the street corner and waved. In Gotham, a criminal realized he could see the chains of fate attached to his victims. The veil between the living and the dead had been thinned permanently. Magic was wilder. Science was less certain. The comic universe had survived the collision with the anime world, but it had not remained the same. It had learned a new language, the language of the soul, and high above, the orange-haired boy slept in the vacuum, dreaming of a strawberry and a crane, holding the door shut against the dark, waiting for the day he could finally go home. The story did not end with a period. It ended with a scar, and scars, as everyone in both universes knew, were just maps of where you had been strong enough to survive. 6 months after the event the media called the Skyfall, the rain in Gotham City felt different. It did not just wet the pavement, it whispered. The citizens had learned to ignore the shadows that moved in the corner of their eyes, the faint, translucent figures that stood at bus stops and faded when looked at directly. The collision of universes had left a permanent residue. The veil between the living and the dead had been stretched thin, and while it had not torn completely, it was now translucent. In a diner on 42nd Street, a waitress poured coffee for a man who wasn't there, realized her mistake, and simply wiped the table with a shudder. It was the new normal. The world had expanded, not in size, but in depth. High above the atmosphere, the construction of the new Justice League satellite was underway. It was being built in a geostationary orbit, but far away from the original coordinates. The old sector was a no-fly zone, marked on every star chart as a sanctuary. In the center of that silence, Ichigo Kurosaki remained. He had not moved. He sat cross-legged in the void, tensor Zangetsu resting across his knees. The chains of his bankai had turned white, calcifying into a permanent barrier that sealed the dimensional scar. He did not breathe, for he had no need of air. He did not eat, for the ambient radiation of the cosmos sustained him. He was a statue carved from resolve, a lighthouse keeper for a shore that no ship should ever approach. Superman visited once a week. He did not approach the boy. He respected the request for isolation. He simply hovered 2 miles away, watching for an hour, ensuring that the Guardian was stable. Sometimes Superman would speak, his voice carried by radio waves that he knew the boy could hear if he chose to listen. He gave updates on the city. He spoke of the cleanup. He spoke of the strange new peace that had settled over the criminal underworld, a fear born of the knowledge that death was not an escape, but a transfer to a jurisdiction with harsher laws. Ichigo never answered. He remained closed off, his internal world a landscape of meditation, where he battled the hunger of the sun he had swallowed. On the dark side of the moon, another statue sat. The entity that was once Doomsday had built a cathedral of grey rock and dust. He sat inside it, the blue crystal in his chest glowing softly in the eternal night. He was learning. He was remembering. He was waiting. He felt the pulse of the boy in orbit, a steady rhythm that kept his own madness at bay. They were a binary system of monsters, the lock and the key, holding the universe together by staying apart. But the silence of space is never truly empty. Millions of miles away, past the orbit of Mars, a ripple appeared in the fabric of reality. It was not a tear like the ones God had made. It was precise. It was elegant. A small slit opened, no larger than a door. From the darkness of the Garganta, a single black butterfly fluttered out. It was a hell butterfly, its wings shimmering with a guidance spell from a distant, desperate soul society. It beat its wings against the vacuum, searching for a spiritual pressure that had vanished from its own world. It found the trail. It turned its fragile body toward Earth, toward the boy who was holding the sky. The crossover was not over. The rescue party had just found the map, and the story of the substitute Soul Reaper in the world of gods was etched into the history of both dimensions, a legend of the day the death god fell to Earth and refused to let it break.